is Danny. I'm the COO here at Firstbase. I'm very excited to have this webinar with the Legalpad team. They'll be able to introduce themselves here in a second and we'll jump into the webinar. But if you're not familiar with Firstbase, we are a technology startup that helps founders from over 170 countries legally incorporate their company in the United States. Since we launched in 2019, we have now helped more than 7,000 founders launch their company in the United States, and for a variety of reasons, one of which we will very keenly discuss today, and that's to move yourself and your family and your company potentially physically to the US if you do not already live in the US. And Legalpad is an amazing company that we've partnered with and that has really supported our founders to obtain a visa. And so today we'll be talking about work visas for startups. The way this will get structured is the Legalpad team will kind of share all the information, and then Jeet and I will do our best to kind of triage the questions. So if you do have a question, if you can please actually use the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar, that would be really helpful for us to organize the questions. And although we will have the Q&A kind of portion at the end of the presentation, we may, if you don't mind, Logan, kind of stop you at the end of a slide or two to ask questions that were relevant to the topics that you were sharing about. So that way, we can kind of intermingle some back and forth. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny, for inviting us. And hello, you all. Greetings from Seattle. Thank you all for joining today. We are excited to do this webinar on work visas for startups. Today, we have got with us Ellison here, who is Director of Marketing for Legalpad. And we have got Logan with us, who is also a startup founder himself on an open visa. So he would be the best resource for you to ask questions, and he would be happy to help you all through the presentation. But yeah, as Danny mentioned, feel free to type your question in question and answer tab, and we'd be happy to address those. Legalpad, just to summarize that, Legalpad is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. Legalpad provides paralegal services in support of immigration document preparation by qualified attorneys. That being said, Logan, you can kick it off.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Quick note as we get started, please update your Zoom so that we can see all your questions and you can see everybody else's. All right. So we're Legalpad. We are a startup taking care of the immigration problem for other startups. What that means is we generally work with founders as they are in the infancy of their company, maybe just incorporated, help move you and your early employees to the US on work visas or on green cards through permanent residency. The best way to think of us is as a resource that you can tap on the shoulder whenever you've got a question about bringing yourself or a teammate or a family member or a potential hire to the US on a visa. Give us a shout. It's always totally free for us to put together a plan of what the next steps are, or maybe what the next few years look like if you want to explore a work visa. So we're here, always free to put together that plan and help you have some clarity into this immigration system. So we do a number of things in the community, things like this in the network events with companies like Firstbase. Our website has tons of material on it on work visas and green cards. I've mentioned the free consultations. We have discounts and fees and discounted fees for the partners that we work with, and are always happy to make introductions to other companies and investors that we work with. So if you've got a question, get in touch and we'd love to try to help you out. So we do support a number of visas and green cards. These are just a small handful of them. We would say that generally, if you are looking to move to the US on a work visa, there's a way for you to do it, and we can help you figure out what that is. These are some of the most common ones for early stage companies and the green cards that follow the early work visas that you would be looking at. So we'll dive into the O1 visa in particular and some of the other visas that are most common for this audience. So we'll talk about why you might want to get a work visa, the most common work visas for entrepreneurs, and we'll leave a lengthy amount of time for Q&A so that we can get through all of these questions that are starting to pop up. Okay, so first thing is, why would you need a work visa? Well, in order to work inside the US, you can't just show up here and start working. You do need, if you're not a citizen, a visa or work authorization to work. So if you are trying to expand to the US or start a new company in the US, maybe you've just incorporated and are planning on spending some time being closer to customers or investors or doing market research, those are all good reasons why you would need a work visa. So a work visa connects an individual to the company that's registered in the US so that the individual can work for that company while they are inside the US. You don't need a work visa if you're outside of the US or working abroad, but while you're in the US, you do need a work visa. Don't think there's any questions on that yet. I'll try to slow down in case the questions are popping up. So we'll go through a handful of the work visa options that may be relevant to you or somebody on your team. The first one that we usually start with is the one that's most popular for startup founders. That's the O1 visa. This is a visa that's labeled as a visa for people with extraordinary ability. And what that really means is that across the board, there's 8 check marks that the government has that says if you hit 3 of these, you are eligible for this visa. These visas apply to startup founders, technologists, scientists. It's really a wide-ranging visa that can be open to a lot of people, so long as we can show that you've had success in different elements of your career. We like this visa because there is no minimum salary, there's no seasonality or lottery that you have to go through to apply for this visa. And once you're on this, you can renew it over and over and over. So right now I'm on an O1. My 3 years are coming up. I'm probably going to renew it pretty soon. And I can renew it over and over and over. As the slide says, it can be a little burdensome to gather all of this evidence. So it's not necessarily the easiest or fastest, at least from a process standpoint, to collect all this information. But we'll talk about some of the other visas and you'll see how they compare. We do have an example. This is one of our customers that we helped get an O1 for. So Brian has a grant from the government, that's the Air Force SBIR, as well as some VC funding that he's received. He's a CEO of his company, so we could show that he had critical employment somewhere. Combination of his salary and his equity in the company helped him hit this high compensation requirement. He's gone through a couple incubators and he's got some press. This is a fairly standard snapshot of the type of customers that we work with for O1 visas. So hopefully that's helpful to see what this looks like with a little bit of context. One of the next visas that we look for is the H-1B. The H-1B is a lottery-based visa, meaning once a year, a bunch of people can enter their ticket into the lottery, and about 30 to 40% are selected. if you're selected, then you get to apply for this visa. The H-1B is really tailored to people in STEM occupations, so medical, science, technologists. And the basic requirements are that you have significant experience in this industry that you're in, or education that sort of matches what you're doing. So if you're a computer scientist applying for a software engineering position, might be the right type of visa for you. All in all, it's a very straightforward visa. The only real downsides are that it is seasonal, so you apply in March or April every year for this lottery. And if you win, then you're able to work in October later that year. So you have to wait for the lottery, get selected, and then apply for it. But it is very straightforward and a good option for people that are eligible and early in their careers. So this is one route that we can look at.
Can I pause you, Logan? There's a couple of questions about the O1 specifically. I just wanted to maybe highlight those while we had a quick overview of it. So one question was, does the company need to be set up in a particular way to qualify or receive an O1 visa?
So the only real requirement that I can think of here is like your company does need to be incorporated in the US, incorporated or registered. It needs to be, exist, I guess, formally registered with the government. Most commonly we see Delaware incorporation, but LLCs are also pretty common. So I hope that answers that question, but that's really the major requirement that we come across most often. And I would add to that it doesn't need to have been aged for a certain period. If you incorporated your company yesterday, we can help you with a visa today.
Cool.
That answers that question.
Yeah, and this is maybe just a follow-up to that. Is there a minimum amount of ownership you have to have of the company?
No. For the O1, you don't need to have any ownership. This could be for the first employee or it could be for the 500th employee. So ownership is not necessary, although the way that we often look for, we evaluate the criteria for the O1, having equity in the company can be advantageous to show that, it's maybe a critical role or that you are being compensated with equity, but it is not a requirement for this visa.
Got it. And then a couple of other questions about the O1. Does it matter at what stage the company is in, as long as it's incorporated? This person asked, hey, we're in the ideation stage, could be obviously maybe pre-revenue. So yeah, is there a requirement in that front?
Generally, we help companies when they've maybe received their first check or are going through an accelerator, but there's not actually a requirement there. Because the O1 is really all about the individual's professional experience, there's no requirement that the company is super established. We've helped, very, very established and public companies with O1s, as well as, companies in their very infancy. So it actually more depends on the individual that's applying and what their professional experience looks like.
Got it.
Logan, can you expand on how the O1 is it looks at your entire career, not necessarily the company that you're working for or working on right at this moment?
Right. Yes. Excellent point. So if you are a startup founder that maybe had a strong career in banking or as a technologist or engineer, what the O1 looks at is your entire professional career anywhere in the world. So if you were in India as a startup founder and now you're moving to the US, or maybe you were a graphic designer in Tokyo and now you're starting something new and want to move to the US, we bundle up all of these different experiences that you've had in order to evaluate against these checkboxes. So the government lays out the 8 potential criteria that you can have, and we want to present you having met 3 of them. So it's fairly common for founders that we work with to, maybe use recent funding that they've received in their new company or an accelerator that they've gone through, in addition to maybe they had high salary at a previous company or were in a critical role in a well-known company prior to the company that they're working for. So yeah, generally like the more positions and experiences you have, the more we can put into an O1 application.
Cool. And then is there a average duration that it takes to apply and then qualify and then actually receive the visa?
Yeah, so for O1s, we're typically putting these together in about 60 days and then submitting them to the government. So it takes 60 days for us to get all your information, draft letters, fill out the forms, have you or your company or your investors, previous employers sign documents that we're submitting as evidence. 60 days to do all of that. That's sort of the Legalpad timeline. Then we submit to the government, and that with premium processing, there's a 15-day period for the government to review applications. So it's pretty common to, have an approval in 75 days, 90 days, something like that. And again, this is any time of the year. So yeah, they're pretty quick.
Yeah, let's keep going. There's a lot of questions, but we'll kind of keep sifting through them, and we may pause you
Sounds
again
good.
after you keep going.
Yeah, we can come back to the O1s for sure. So we started to go through the H-1B, and I think we got most of the way through that. I don't think there's anything left to cover there. Again, this requires a company registered in the US to sponsor, and there are some salary requirements for each role. The government says a software engineer must make this much, a doctor must make that much to be on an H-1B. So generally, if your company's registered and can pay the salary, and the individual has the education and the job title to match the role, you're a good fit for the H-1B. Now, E1 and E2 visas are investor visas, so they work a little bit differently. What these visas are is we're saying that you're bringing money from some other country, a country that has a treaty with the US, and you are following that money in to, build a company in the U.S. And create, opportunity and economic activity in the U.S. So, as a minimum, we would say, you want to probably be bringing 100K or more into the U.S. to have a decent shot at one of these visas. And main advantages of these ones are that if you have a spouse or husband, wife, spouse, they can work as well. They get a visa that comes with work authorization. This one you can also apply any time of the year. It is quick to put together like the O1. And this one is one that often works well for like bootstrapped companies. Maybe you haven't gone down, the startup path of raising money or going through an accelerator or that sort of traditional thing. Maybe you've just built a solid business, a Shopify store, manufacturing something or other. For more traditional businesses where you're a little more under the radar, the E1 and E2 are strong options. there are some additional requirements on the E1 and E2. You do need to set up sort of milestones that you can show after a number of years. So there is a set lifespan on these, and in order to keep the visa, you need to sort of meet the milestones that have initially been set out. So there are some upsides and some downsides to this one, but that's why we're here, is to help you evaluate whichever makes the most sense for you. I'm sure there's going to be questions about this one.
Yeah, it looks like there's one that just came in. Does the money have to come from you personally? Could it come from your foreign country or another investor?
It can come from any of those. And it gets pretty technical on how we set that argument up, but we've helped people with all of these, whether it's an investor in a certain company putting this money in, or the entrepreneur themselves, or someone else. I actually don't know enough about the logistics of how we present that argument, but it doesn't necessarily need to be your personal cash that you're investing. It can be money coming from somebody else in that country. I hope that answers that question.
Yep. And I got another question about the H-1B, the one that you described previously.
Sure.
What is the duration to apply for this one? It says here that, I'm not sure, he asked about the duration. I don't know if it's the time to apply or, the visa like duration, which is 6 years, I think you mentioned.
Yep.
But yeah, what's the application process look like timeline-wise?
So the H-1B is quick to put together. If it's your initial H-1B, you have to go through the lottery. So we put together those applications around March and put you into the lottery. And then if you're selected, we handle the full application. So the first step is kind of just putting your name in the hat and saying, I'd like to put an application in, and the government selects about 30–40% of those and says, you have been selected, you can file a petition for this person to get an H-1B visa. Usually takes us about 2 weeks to put together the whole petition. It takes us a day or two to collect everything to enter the initial lottery. If you're selected and your petition goes through, sometime between April and October usually is when the government will review your application and approve it or ask for more evidence on some aspect of it. If you are approved, then you will have a start date of October 1st of that year. So in this upcoming year, lottery is, I always forget if it's March or April, but it's in the beginning of the year. You'll put in that initial lottery. If you're selected, sometime between April and October, we'll drop the application, the petition. And then the next available time for anybody in the H-1B lottery to begin working is October 2022. I hope I covered all the timing there. Oh, thank you, Allison. It is March.
Yeah.
Any other questions that you see, Danny or Jeet?
We are getting some questions about E1, E2 as well. So can the money be made in the US while remotely to apply for the E1, E2?
That's a question that I'm not entirely sure about. I don't know if I understand enough about where
Yeah,
the
maybe
money
if you
is
could.
coming from.
Yeah, if
So
I
I don't
could
want to.
rephrase it, then that would be great.
Yeah. We want to show that money's traveling from outside the US into the US, and that the person receiving the visa is accompanying it and deploying it in some way. I can jump to another option that is sort of newly available. The International Entrepreneur Rule, or International Entrepreneur Parolee, is a different option available for founders that have raised some money. The general requirement here is that you've raised $250,000 or more from American investors, and you own 10% or more of that company. So it's pretty straightforward on paper. We also want to show, that you have a history of entrepreneurship and being able to build companies and deploy capital. But on the face of it, we're looking for 250K or more from American investors, and you own at least 10% of the company. So this is a new one that's sort of popped up this year as an option that entrepreneurs can look at again. Like the E2, this allows your spouse to work if you get this visa. So it's a good option for families that might have two people traveling. Yeah, any questions that you guys see?
Yeah, there's a lot of them that are, I think, a bit more general, and I think it'd be good. We can keep piling on. For those that have repeated their question multiple times, it's not that we're ignoring it. We have, like Logan mentioned, we're gonna have a bit of time at the end for kind of the more general questions. I think Gina and I are just trying to catch the ones that are kind of more specific to each of these. So if we're not answering your question, that isn't because we're ignoring it. But yeah, maybe Logan, we can keep kind of pumping through and then make way for that time at the end if that's appropriate for you.
Totally. So we've gone through some of the, the E1, E2, H1B, O1. These are all country agnostic options. There are a handful of visas that are available to citizens of certain countries. The TN is one of those. This is a visa that's available for citizens of Canada and Mexico. What we're looking for here is that you are working in a certain field, usually a STEM field, and this is a very quick, very straightforward application. If you are in a STEM field and Canadian or Mexican, we can often put together these visas in under 2 weeks. The E3 is sort of an Australian H1B. The nice thing about this one is you don't need to go through the lottery. So if you're working in a specialty occupation and have a job offer in the US, you can apply for an E3. And so long as your sort of job description and job title and education all match up, studied computer science, now you're a software engineer being paid a reasonable salary, then the E3 visa is very straightforward. And the H1B1 is also very, very similar to that in that this is an H1B visa for people from Chile or Singapore, but they are lottery exempt as well. So they just have an easier time applying for those visas. In addition to all these visas, we have a number of options for permanent residency, as most of this audience is maybe earlier in evaluating setting up in the US, incorporating, and then coming to the US to work. We haven't touched on permanent residency or green cards, but there are a lot of options there as well. But I guess with that, we can jump deeper into the Q&A, and I'll leave this up here. So if you are looking at applying for a visa or really just want to hop on a call with us and learn more, get a detailed screening, have us look at your situation, you can go to this page here and schedule a time with us. And I'll move into the Q&A portion now. Oh, and this is up here too. Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much, Logan, for that. And if you've been on a Firstbase webinar before, you've probably heard me say this multiple times, but you know, you as a founder are very unique, and probably situationally, depending on where you live, what type of business, whether you're fundraising, what type of entity, you know, it creates a very specific case to you. And I think we're all, not to sound cheesy, but we're all kind of snowflakes in that regard. And so on a webinar like this, we'll do our best to answer some of kind of these broad questions that people have. But one of the beauties of an organization like Legalpad is that they do offer a conversation to understand your situation. So, you know, I've seen some really specific questions about kind of your business and what you do, and if you can or cannot get to the US in one or more visas. I would encourage everyone to take advantage of the consultation. You can use this link. I'll include the link in the chat, but I just want to say that. So if we ignore your question, it's probably because it's too specific. So we'll encourage you to go schedule that. But yeah, I'll start at the top and then we can kind of go through, because there's a bunch of these questions that are available. So I guess the first one, does it matter, or is there an advantage to obtain a visa if like a co-founder of your business is a US citizen and you are not?
No, I can't really think of an instance where that becomes advantageous. Pretty much all of these visas are more about the individual's accomplishments or education or history and the circumstances of the company. So there isn't an advantage to having an American co-founder or boss or anything like that. It's a good question, but yeah, no need to race to find an American co-founder. You can incorporate without one and start on a visa.
Got it. Okay. And then the O1 only allows the spouse to legally stay in the US, doesn't allow the spouse to legally work. Is there a remedy for this particular situation once you get approved and move to the US?
Yeah, there's, first of all, the understanding there is totally correct. You know, a spouse or children accompanying someone on the O1 can't work in the US, at least not on the O3 visa. However, once they are in the US or even before, they can also apply for a work visa if they're eligible for any of them. But one of the more common routes we see there is a founder come into the US on the O1 visa, and then once they're landed and have begun working, they begin the process of getting permanent residency. And so permanent residency or getting a green card, that is, you know, that helps you and your family, your spouse, your kids. You can all get permanent residency, which essentially lets you live as a citizen without the right to vote. You can work for whoever you want or decide not to work at all. So that's the more common path, is to go from a work visa to permanent residency to sort of establish your self in the US.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your question. This one, I don't know if this is actually a Firstbase question or a Legalpad question, but if we incorporate a company in the US, will I be able to work from India for the startup till I get a visa for the US? I don't see why not.
Yeah, so long as you're outside of the US, I mean, you can work for whoever you want. At least the US doesn't look at who you are. Oh, that's a hard way to phrase that. You don't need a US work visa to work for a company that's registered in the US if you are outside of the US. If you're working in the US, that's when the US cares about you having a work visa. Now, I don't know about your own particular country and if there's any quirks there about you working for a company that's registered in the US. But generally, you're fine to work for that US company.
Wonderful. For the country-specific visas, for like the TN, for example, the description says Mexican citizens can apply for this visa by mailing an application. So for all of these, for Canadians, Mexicans, Australians, Chileans, and Singaporeans, do they both need to be a citizen of that country and currently physically live there, or can they be one or the other? Can they be just a resident and not a citizen of one of those countries? What can you be a bit more specific on, kind of country specific?
Yeah, for all of these countries listed, you actually need to be a citizen of the country. And where you're applying from can be a little tricky to sort of get through on this call, but if you're a citizen of these countries, then you can apply, and you're generally not required to be in that specific country at that time. So if you're a Canadian living in Belgium right now, you could still put an application in. You don't necessarily need to be inside that country when you apply. I guess that's probably as close as I can come to answering that question without going too specific.
I think the question may have come up because on Canada and Mexico specifically, we call out that if you're a Canadian applying for the TN, you can apply right at the border. Whereas in Mexico, you cannot apply at the border, but instead you actually mail in the application. So that may have been where that question came from.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
And if you're, say, a Mexican inside the US, you could mail it in. If you're a Mexican in Mexico or some other country, you can mail this in. Same thing for Canadians. Canadians also have the ability to apply at the border.
Great. And this is related to the O1, the kind of aging, the fact that the company doesn't need to be a certain year old. So they said relating to aging for the remuneration requirement, is that something that needs to be planned in advance, i.e. a year ahead? I'm not sure I understand the question, but.
I'm not sure I understand it either. So I would probably just reiterate that your company doesn't need to be aged at all. If you incorporate with Firstbase tomorrow, then we can start working on an application with you on Friday. There's no requirement that your company has been set up for a certain amount of time.
Cool. So there's this question here. I'm assuming it's related to like funding or cash in hand. Would putting some amount in the US account, I'm assuming US bank account for the business, help in any way to obtain a visa quicker or more effectively?
Yeah. While there isn't an amount that you need to have in the bank, you have to, if you are on a visa and working in the US, you have to be paid at least minimum wage. And depending on the visa, you maybe need to be paid more than that. So having money in the bank is a good way to show that your company can actually pay you the salary that you are supposed to be earning. Though it's not necessarily a requirement, it does often come up. If you don't have money currently in the bank, but you can show that maybe there's an investor about to give you $500,000, or you have big contracts coming in, those things can also sort of help ease some of the issues around the question of how will you be paying yourself. But there's not a requirement that you have a certain amount of money in the bank at any particular time. But that's really a legal strategy question that we can help you understand.
Awesome. And this is a really good question. They asked specifically about the O1, but just maybe in general, the entire visa process. Has COVID affected it? And if so, without going into too much detail, like some examples.
COVID has affected us in a number of ways, but none of them are too drastic. I guess I would say the government is still approving visas as regularly and quickly as they were before, you know, but where we see the most impact is actually after a visa has been approved. For most visa types, a visit to the consulate is required to get a visa sticker. So if you just got your O1 visa, maybe you're in India, the next step is for you to go to a consulate and get that visa sticker. Lots of consulates are closed due to COVID, so it can be tricky, or there can be significant delays to getting an appointment to get visa stickers right now. There are also a number of ways to work around that we can help with. Ooh, and I've lost my train of thought there.
No, I think that was a good bit. Timeline is often, especially with like embassies and government processes slowing down a bit. We've seen that on the incorporation side. At times, especially kind of at the peak of COVID. So I think those are all fair statements. So this is actually a good question. Maybe this is a good reminder on kind of the scope of service that Legalpad provides as a company. And so this person asked, does Firstbase / Legalpad kind of incorporating the US and applying for a visa, like does Firstbase or Legalpad help in bypassing local US embassy procedures? And then maybe more broadly, does Firstbase Legalpad help expedite or assure an applicant of a visa to the US?
Okay, so first question was expedited consulate appointments. Was that my?
Yeah, does it bypass local embassy procedures?
So this is getting pretty in the weeds, but we can advise a few different ways to get around the consulate issue. There are some consulates that you can go to if you are not a citizen of that consulate's like home country. So many of our customers right now are going to Panama or Colombia or Romania to get appointments right now because their local or home consulates are closed. So there are consulates that you can go to if you're a national of another country to get your visa sticker. There are travel ban issues as well. So you want to time out your travel so that you're not passing through certain countries in the 2 weeks prior to you entering the US. India does not have a country-specific visa. The question about, Danny, remind me the second part of that question.
Yeah, so how does Legalpad help or expedite this kind of visa process?
So I guess in a number of ways. If you just need the quick approval, we have options to sort of fast track or expedite a visa petition. Like I said, it usually takes us about 60 days, but if you've got some sort of emergency, we can work with you to speed that timeline up. We put premium processing on everything we do by default, so the government handles the application as quickly as possible and in 15 days or less. And then when it comes to the consulate issue, there's also an avenue to ask a consulate to expedite your visa appointment so that you can If you had an appointment and they said come back in 500 days to get your visa sticker, there is an avenue to ask for an expedited appointment, something under 30 days, so that you can get your sticker, get an exemption from the travel ban, and get to the US immediately. So that's something that we're also helping founders with.
Cool.
That was a tough question.
Yeah. And I don't remember the exact quote, but I think you said it perfectly in the beginning that, Legalpad is a resource and a company that's like kind of always available to tap on the shoulder to help. I guess this is maybe dumb for me to say, but Legalpad isn't the government approving these, and very much kind of the same way that Firstbase, we're not the government setting up the entity, and so that distinction I think is helpful, I guess, in the scope of service that Legalpad provides in relation to a visa application.
Totally. We just want to help you interface with the government in a fast and painless way.
Cool. And there looks like there's some questions specific to a couple of the visa types. So as it relates to the E1, E2, is it that you are investing into a US company that isn't your company and then working for that same company, or is it just an investment in the company, and so you do not need to work for the company that you're investing in?
You do need to work for the company that you are investing in. I think that's the most succinct way I can answer that, but yeah, you are bringing money into a particular company and working for that company, deploying that capital to meet whatever goals that you've set out in your visa petition.
And sorry, I know like this one of the slides was not about the L1, but we had a couple of questions about that. Do you mind me asking a couple questions? Oh, there it is.
Hello.
Yeah. What will be the qualified amount for an L1?
I'm not sure, what is amount referring to? Is that a dollar amount, an employee amount? I guess I could speak very high level to the L1. The L1, if you have a company set up in the US that is attached to a company in another country, and somebody has worked for the overseas company for more than a year, they can transfer from the overseas company to the US company. There is not particularly a certain amount of salary or employee base in either company that is required. Though certainly lawyers would advise that a company needs to be of a certain size and salaries need to be of a certain size for this to have like the most highest chance of success. I hope that answers that. We didn't spend time talking about the L1s.
Yeah, I think that should be more than sufficient. And I think as a reminder, yeah, you can always go to that link and schedule a quick conversation situationally if that's helpful as well.
Danny, there's a good question here. Benugda asked, can you hire people and provide employment? If you are on a work visa, yes, absolutely. You can hire other people, whether they're Americans or other people that would be on work visas. Yeah, you can hire, manage, work with, all that stuff.
Cool. So I know we have only a couple of minutes here, and I know without spilling the beans, there's some additional kind of like slides on the back end. Is there anything there that, as we've kind of walked through some of these questions, anything you wanted to highlight by chance?
I don't really think so. I think I would really just reiterate that we are here as a resource for you to talk with and, get an individual understanding of your case. So, feel free to go to the site and book a time to chat with us and we can help you dive deeper into what options you have.
Cool. I think I missed this person's question. It's a very specific one. I have 50% of a company that buys phones in the US and exports, and I need to go to the US to, like, I guess, check merchandise. Is there a visa that I can, or what type of visa would allow me to, like, visit the US? I think that's what he's asking.
This is a very specific question. And depending on how you're set up, like maybe an O1, maybe an L1, maybe an E1 or E2. I think that's one that we'd have to dive in much deeper to figure out what you're doing and what the sort of needs of the business are. Or if you need a work visa at all, maybe a visitor visa is sufficient for you to enter the US.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely missed a lot of questions as well, but which are probably like very specific questions as well to your specific scenario. So it's really hard to address those as well. So as Logan mentioned, like you are welcome to go to this link and book a meeting with us, and we'll be happy to help you. I'm gonna post that link over here in the chat as well. Oh, actually, wait. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll be happy to address those, and you can always email us as well.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
There is a question about the international entrepreneur parole. So that particular option has a 5-year maximum. We mentioned here that you cannot change your status while in the US. And the question is about like what happens at that 5-year period, once that 5-year period is up, what do you do? So Logan, can you explain what change of status means and elaborate there?
Totally. So the international entrepreneur parolee is not actually a visa, or is it a visa status? So if you're in the US on an O1 or an E1 or an H1B, you have a visa status. It says you can remain in the US for this set period of time and work for this set period of time. The international entrepreneur parolee is actually an exemption from the requirement to have a visa, which means that unlike most, if not all of these other visas, you can't change from one status to another because you don't actually have a status. So for example, if you were on a B1 visiting and apply for an O1, if you're in the US, you can apply for change of status to move from B1 to O1. You can't do that while you're on the international entrepreneur parolee visa, but it's not a visa. So the options for you are to leave the country and apply for a visa, or to apply for a green card once you are outside of the country. Did I hit that one? That was a specific one.
I think so.
Yeah. Yes. And it's I appreciate, Logan, you taking the time to answer these. Yeah, like as we run up against the clock here, the recording and the presentation will be shared. On top of that, feel free to use the link that Jeet included to schedule that. There are some conversations or questions about like price and things like that. Or you guys can answer that. I would typically say to have a conversation, or Allison just posted to book a meeting. Yeah, I think situationally everyone is so unique and different that we'd actually all of us would probably be doing you guys a disservice by trying to provide an answer with, just without all of the detail and color. So, please take advantage of that. And Legalpad has been a great resource for so many of our founders at Firstbase. And so, yeah, we're very excited to spend this hour with them, and hopefully, all of you guys who are on here, whether live or just a registrant, can take advantage of their awesome resources as well. So, thanks so much, guys. Logan, Allison, Jeet, I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to add, but really appreciate just taking the time and energy to invest in our community.
Our pleasure, Danny. Thank you.